Previously on Wandering Bard Gaming. So today I'm going to be going back to Final Fantasy XVI, and I'm going to start, of course, with the coolest, most awesome and beloved character in the game, Torgal. What, you thought I meant him? I'll do a video on him later. Today I'm analyzing the dog. Alright everyone, Wandering Bard here, and this video is me reckoning with my failures. Not me trolling you with the Torgal video, that one I still think is funny. My failure is that it took me this long to make a Cid video in the first place. Final Fantasy XVI came out a year ago, and back when I first started making character videos for it, this was one that got requested by one of my commenters, and I never ended up making it. Honestly, for a while I wasn't even sure if I could make a Cid analysis in my usual style. For those of you who've never watched one of my character videos, typically I focus on the arc they have, and how said character learns and grows over their adventures. In the case of a character like Fang, for example, who I feel didn't have a very strong arc, I'll typically talk through what I think the writers were going for and how I think it could have been improved. In Cid's case, however, I can't really do either. He doesn't have an arc to talk through, but there's actually a good reason for that. See, unlike most Final Fantasy games where there's a strong focus on a party of heroes, Final Fantasy XVI has a much more traditional story structure for its characters. You have your hero, an ally, a love interest, a villain, some interesting henchmen, and a mentor, which in this case is Cid. Actually, Cid fits a mentor role in most Final Fantasy games, but that's beyond the point. The result of this is that he's already had his character arc long before the events of the game, and now he's trying to guide the people around him to help build a better world. We get flashes of his backstory throughout the game, and we can make some inferences about the type of person he was back then, but there's a lot of questions left unanswered. We don't know much detail. So, rather than worry about his arc or spend the entire video theory crafting about his history, I wanted to use this video to discuss why Cid is the perfect mentor. Why is it that so many people, including Clive and Jill, are willing to go completely against the status quo to follow him, even when some of his ideas are absolutely insane? That is the question I'm going to try and answer with this video. Let's see what we can come up with.
It's alright. They can't hurt you anymore.
So this is a scene that could be looked at in two different ways. For Benedicta, the significance of the moment is quite obvious. This was a pivotal moment in her life as she's being freed from slavery, and also the beginning of her relationship with Cid. But the reason I think this scene is so important for Cid's character isn't just that it began his relationship with Benedicta, but chronologically, this is the beginning of Cid's story as we know it. This happened before he came to Waloed or became the dominant of Ramuh. At this time, he's just a wandering sellsword who came from outside Valisthea looking for work, and in this scene, he establishes exactly the kind of person he is. He's someone who cares enough to help the oppressed and the downtrodden. The reason I love this so much is that so much of what we get from his backstory sounds like the cliche of mentor who used to be allied with the villain and now they're a good guy because they deeply regret their past actions. Because after Cid rescued Benedicta, they entered the service of Waloed. They both awoke as dominants of Ramuh and Garuda respectively, and Cid was elevated to Lord Commander of the military because of that. Thing is, he later had a falling out with Barnabas, the king of Waloed and also the dominant of Odin, and he left his position and Benedicta to become an outlaw. It has all the pieces of a remorseful mentor story, but the reason it doesn't feel like one is because there's nothing for him to regret. He didn't gain his values because of regrets over past mistakes. He demonstrated value through his actions long before he had power and prestige, back when he was just a merc who saw a chance to help someone and took it. The moment he learned that wrong was being done by Waloed and by the world at large to bearers, he immediately righted his course. So his actions now aren't him trying to atone for anything. They're just an expression of who he always was, just now he has a tangible mission to achieve.
All I want to do is help. Dominants like her, branded like you. Of course, the realm doesn't approve, which is why we live in a cave.
It wasn't explained at first what exactly caused Cid and Barnabas to fall out. Given that Cid both recognized who Ultima was and had an immediate hostile reaction towards him, I had initially assumed that it was because of Barnabas' worship of Ultima, whose eventual plan was to rule over the world and turn all humans into Akashic, to mindless, soulless husks of ether.
Not turn, Mythos. Turn back.
But that doesn't quite fit, because if Cid knew about Ultima's plans, he would have put forth a concentrated effort to stop them, which he doesn't do. He also could easily have gone to any other nation, except maybe the Iron Kingdom, because his knowledge of Waloed and him being the dominant of Ramuh would have made him valuable, especially to the Holy Empire of Sanbreque. We learn the truth a while later. Back when Cid was Lord Commander of Waloed, his friend Otto fathered a child who ended up being a bearer. Otto had nothing but love for his son, but his family immediately called the garrison and abandoned the child, which sadly is a pretty common occurrence in Valisthea when a bearer is born. Otto couldn't accept this, and when Cid learned what had happened, he couldn't accept it either. He left everything, his position, Benedicta, his entire life from Waloed, and became an outlaw, all to make sure that the wrong done to his friend would never happen again. To me, this feels way more satisfying than him leaving to stop a world-ending plot because, well, there's no personal stake in Cid's mission. Like any half-decent person would try to save the world if they knew what Ultima was trying to do, but too many half-decent people were willing to sit back and watch the wrong done to bearers and even participate in it because it benefited them. And Cid would have had a lot of reason to just look the other way and let the status quo continue because the status quo benefited him more than most. In fact, his life as Lord Commander in Waloed was perfect. He had power, he had authority, and he had a woman who completely adored him. Most people in his position wouldn't have been brave or strong enough to give that up. In fact, in another video, I talked about how that was exactly the problem Benedicta faced, that she chose to compromise her morality in order to keep her secure position in Waloed. Cid is the opposite. He gave up a comfortable life to help other people because his ideals convicted him to do so. And that's where we get into why so many people are willing to follow him. Because most people in Valisthea would value Cid for his power or his intelligence, of which he has both in spades. As the dominant of Ramuh, he's one of the most powerful people in the world, and he's also an absolute genius. He masterminds the creation of a sanctuary in the middle of the Deadlands, areas ravaged by blight, and even found a way to grow food there. He and his daughter, Mid, built the Orchestrion together and also designed the Enterprise, a warship so advanced Mid herself said the world wasn't ready for it. And obviously all of that does play into why he's qualified as a leader, but the reason people follow him is because he has integrity. And he isn't all talk, he takes the lead in shaping a better world. And that plays into the kind of mentor he is for Clive.
Funny. I'd always pictured you as more the chocobo type. Clive Rosfield.
One of my other failures as a character analyst is that I made an entire video on Clive Rosfield, and I hardly mentioned the role Cid had in shaping his journey. I spent way more time talking about Clive's father, Duke Elwyn, and to be fair, Duke Elwyn did instill in his two sons the values that would define their lives. Even Clive's goodness towards bearers was something that he first learned from his father. So Cid's role as his mentor is kind of unique as fantasy stories go. He doesn't need to teach Clive much about the world, and he doesn't need to teach Clive to be a good person. Clive was always a good man, he just lost his way after 13 years of slavery, and Cid helps him find it again.
And it's also why we need help. From Branded who know one end of a sword from the other. What say you, Clive? Will you join us?
I love that Cid obviously wants Clive to help with his mission, but he doesn't try to force Clive into it. He won't try to force anyone to walk his path, actually. I think Cid wanted people like him, people who follow him because they're convicted by their values, rather than out of obligation or personal benefit. The one time we really see Cid put his foot down with Clive was when Clive had an emotional breakdown after realizing he was the one who killed his brother. And to be honest, it's probably good that he did that because Clive was not in a place to think clearly in that moment. Cid helps Clive see a path out of his despair, and when that path diverges from Cid, he once again doesn't try to force Clive into anything. Obviously, he hoped Clive and Jill would come back to him, and he was happy when they did, but he doesn't try to force them to. He just gave them what they needed, which is exactly what a good mentor does. They mentor. So when Clive does come back and he pledges himself to Cid's cause, Cid recognizes that this is what he really wants. In fact, Clive had a better version of Cid's dream than Cid did.
Cid, you once told me that you wanted to build a place where people could die on their own terms.
I did.
I've been thinking about that. Why not a place where people can live on their own terms?
I think this is where Cid really began to see Clive as a kindred spirit, and that's why he passes his mantle on to Clive when he dies. Because he sees that Clive has the same values that he does, and that he has both the power and conviction to carry their dream on to the end. For Cid, it wasn't about being in charge. Like, he was happy to be the mastermind because he was good at it, but it was never about being the boss or about there being personal benefit for him. It was about helping people. And so when he knows that Clive will continue that mission, he's able to die without regret, knowing the dream will carry on. Or, well, maybe he had one regret.
Why? Why did you have to listen to him? Benner.
If Cid had one regret in his life, I think it would be that he couldn't get through to Benedicta. One major unanswered question from his backstory is whether or not he tried to convince her to come with him before he left Waloed in the first place. Maybe he tried and failed, or maybe he could see that she'd already lost her way and was devoted fully to Barnabas. Maybe he didn't try because he was afraid she'd turn him in. We don't know. The hard thing here is that even as much as he cared for Benedicta, his honor compelled him to leave Waloed regardless of whether she was willing to join him. Benedicta, meanwhile, took him leaving as him abandoning her personally, as a betrayal of their bond. And she lets her pain and her fear of abandonment define the rest of her life. So when she does meet Cid again, he tries to appeal to the person he used to know, but that's not her anymore. And she's too blinded by her own pain to listen to him until it's too late. I can't judge whether there's more Cid could have done to reach her because I don't know what he tried before he left her. But what's important here is that he does try. And the important thing to remember when advising someone or mentoring them is that what they end up doing is their choice. And if they choose the wrong path or a different path than you advised them to, that doesn't mean you failed them as a mentor. Cid was able to connect with Clive because Clive already shared a lot of the same ideals that he did. Clive just needed time to find his path, and Cid gave him the space and the tools to do that. Benedicta also used to share Cid's dream of freedom, but she became too blinded by fear and then anger to listen to Cid. What's important is that through it all, he kept trying to be the best example that he could. Throughout his life, he stayed true to his ideals and did what he could to make the world better, even if that meant making personal sacrifices. And he never tried to force anyone to live on his terms. He just gave them a space where they could live on their own. And these are the qualities that make him an amazing mentor and that give him such a big impact even though we don't get a ton of time with him in game. And yeah, that concludes my Cid analysis. This was a bit different from my usual character video, but I really hope you enjoyed it, and that you'll consider subscribing if you want more content like this. Jill is next on my list for Final Fantasy XVI, but I haven't finished the Rise and Tide DLC yet, my fault for being underleveled for it, and I want to make sure we have all the Jill content we can before I finalize the script. There is plenty more coming soon though, so hit the subscribe button if you want to see it as it comes out, and until that happens, I hope you have a good one. I'll see you later.
I reckon I can take you, if that's what you want. But first, I thought I'd give you the benefit of my timeless wisdom. It seems to me, you see, that since you're still breathing, you might as well make yourself useful. Get dressed. Pretty as you are, you're not my type.